Hello to everyone, to our guests and FSP members. I'm really excited to be able to share disability justice with you all here today. Before I begin, I'd like to start with a visual description of myself, which is a tool for individuals who are unable to see the screen for any reason to have more context about the speaker. My name is Kendra Scalia. I am a white disabled woman. I have long dark hair and I'm wearing a gray sweater. I have a blurred background, but occasionally you can see a black headrest from my wheelchair in view. Around 2005, a group of queer disabled women of color from Oakland, California, began discussing with one another their experiences within the disability rights movement. These conversations centered on how disability rights lack an intersectional understanding of oppression and makes invisible the issues and people whose lives exist at the juncture of these identities. Because disability rights rests on a philosophy of independent living and promoting autonomy for disabled individuals, it generally accepts the free market ideology by fighting for equal treatment from the marketplace. While civil rights legislation throughout the 70s and early 90s promised equality for disabled bodies and minds, concerns of Black and queer disabled individuals continued to be marginalized. And it's no wonder, because the disability rights movement has largely centered the experience of disabled white cis men. Similarly, disabled individuals with intersectional identities experienced ableism and othering when attempting to participate in spaces carved out by feminists, queer groups, and communities of color. Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, and others discussing these experiences eventually conceptualized disability justice and developed principles for the movement. Disability justice is distinctly not disability rights. Disability justice is a framework for movement organizing. From the legacies of resistance is born a way of being that recognizes and celebrates our whole selves, compromising nothing and demanding no less than what each deserves. The disability justice framework includes 10 principles. Each with their brief descriptions deserve repeating in full. 1, intersectionality. Ableism coupled with white supremacy, supported by capitalism, underscored by heteropatriarchy, has rendered the vast majority of the world invalid. And it's accompanied by a quote from Audre Lorde: "We do not live single issue lives." 2, leadership of those most impacted. And this is only accompanied by a quote from Aurora Levins Morales that states, "We are led by those who most know these systems." 3, an anti-capitalist politic. In an economy that sees land and humans as components of profit, we are anti-capitalist by the nature of having non-conforming body minds. 4, commitment to cross-movement organizing. Shifting how social justice movements understand disability and contextualize ableism, disability justice lends itself to politics of alliance. 5, recognizing wholeness. People have inherent worth outside of commodity relations and capitalist notions of productivity, and each person is full of history and life experience. 6, sustainability. We pace ourselves, individually and collectively, to be sustained long-term. Our embodied experiences guide us toward ongoing justice and liberation. 7, commitment to cross-disability solidarity. We honor the insights and participation of all of our community members, knowing that isolation undermines collective liberation. 8, interdependence. We meet each other's needs as we build toward liberation, knowing that state solutions inevitably extend into further control over our lives. 9, collective access. As brown, Black, and queer-bodied disabled people, we bring flexibility and creative nuance that go beyond able-bodied-minded normativity to be in community with one another. And 10, collective liberation. No body or mind can be left behind. Only moving together can we accomplish the revolution that we require. Like the feminist socialist movement, disability justice demands leadership from the most oppressed. Those at the bottom of socioeconomic structures are the natural leaders of a new tomorrow. Queer and trans disabled women of color experience intertwined layers of oppression that uniquely place them at the center of change. And disabled people are a brilliant, adaptable, and creative community. Our lives rely on flexibility and improvisation. adjusting to situations outside of our control day by day and sometimes minute by minute. Disabled women of color are the leaders a revolutionary feminist socialist movement demands of us. Disability justice recognizes that what happens to our disabled siblings abroad is just as important as how we are treated at home. Disability justice recognizes all land and all people as sacred. Our oppressions may have nuance specific to a geographic and political arena, but the ableism and lack of economic opportunity is echoed in every nation. We understand our interconnected struggles as being rooted in the destructive and devaluing nature of capitalism and imperialism, all in an effort to further divide and conquer on lines of difference. Anti-capitalism must be the goal, and it is a key part of the lens through which disability justice breathes. Disability justice is a call to overthrow those who oppress us around the world and to reclaim power for the people. Disability justice co-founder Patty Byrne eloquently stated it best, and I quote, "We cannot comprehend ableism without grasping its interrelations with heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism, each system co-creating an ideal body-mind built upon the exclusion and elimination of a subjugated other from whom profits and status are extracted." And while disability justice principles themselves do not directly discuss a united front, disability justice co-founders have written about its importance in context of the tenets of collective liberation and others. The practice of disability justice is ultimately to ensure that our communities are ready to mobilize against oppressive systems for housing justice, environmental justice, universal health care, food justice, voting rights and democracy for all, for community safety, and all other areas of activism. We are invested in each other's well-being. But unlike other movements, the language shift from focusing on rights to justice is tangible. The justice, capital J, in disability justice is far more than a simple reframing of rights we must win to fairness within a system. The principles demand that we think, organize, and move forward in a different way. It's critical that we fully understand the tenets so that we can recognize where and with whom disability justice is fully practiced. Many groups and individuals don disability justice as a badge, an indication that they are somehow at the forefront of change, yet they typically aren't practicing disability justice. And this is most apparent when the anti-capitalist principle is considered. White disabled figureheads often ignore the anti-capitalist demand, erasing an economic argument altogether, or they manipulate and transform anti-capitalism into something more digestible. Most often we see this principle reworded as, quote, self-defined labor value, or, quote, a pushback against a set level of productivity. Yet this slowdown of economic expectations only bolsters the capitalist system, and here is where we must push back. Some of the most notorious white disabled leaders call for disability justice. They have social media reach in the thousands. They are routinely invited to speak on mainstream media platforms, sit in closed-door meetings with Congress members and the executive administration, and consult on issues of accessibility with the bourgeoisie. And while I do not question these leaders' desire for equality, they lack the urgency with which change must be made, and are therefore more pliable to accepting less than what the whole community deserves. Their lives are insulated from the worst atrocities of the system. Reformism and incremental change are seen as a necessary evil. They attempt to quiet the voices of disabled leftists who demand a full loaf of bread and not just the crumbs. They are capital D Democrats, themselves running for office, accepting paid positions with the DNC, and encouraging support of Democratic Party candidates. These disabled misleaders desert disability justice principles and lead impressionable community members astray. In my soapbox piece published in the April issue of Freedom Socialist on this topic, I stated, "You cannot call yourself a disability justice leader and a Democrat." It's worth repeating here, as it is a clear message I want to send to both those who attempt to co-opt disability justice and those new to the disability justice framework. During the 2020 presidential primaries, these class traders overwhelmingly threw their support behind Elizabeth Warren. And when it became apparent that Biden would ultimately be the Democratic Party candidate, they enthusiastically supported the endorsement, claiming that the disability community would be well served, heard, and even promoted into employment positions at an historic rate. They brought with them into campaign meetings the phrase disability justice, yet no disability justice was happening. And ultimately, they have been unable to deliver on a single promise to the community. I stood among a handful of disabled leftists speaking out against these figureheads. We were routinely told to quiet down and that we should thank capitalist politicians for literally just uttering the word disability in a speech. Their efforts to work within the capitalist system has set into motion an uphill battle for those of us who value the true nature of disability justice. Politicians, most notably Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, speak about the importance of disability justice. But when doing so, Pressley typically highlights programs and legislation that are squarely grown by disability rights advocates. As a Black disabled woman herself, she garners significant interest and followers from within the disability community. Many are coming to disability justice for the first time through hearing her words, which are a gross misrepresentation of the true nature of disability justice. We now see community organizations and even grassroots organizers claiming disability justice without changing their mode of operation, often because they lack the knowledge of what disability justice is as a specific framework. When the term is used without caution, it's easy to become an unknowing participant in actively oppressing the very real lives of those who rely on disability justice organizing. In 2021, disability justice leaders lent their talents to developing a federal guideline on home and community-based services, or HCBS. HCBS includes, but is not exclusive to, home care services for people with disabilities. This guideline amounted to a minimum $4 trillion federal investment over 10 years. As liberal Congress members discussed the feasibility of such a proposal within the Build Back Better bill, they brought in some of the same white disabled individuals who were persuaded to accept more than a 60% cut in the proposed budget. Once again, Build Back Better was billed to the disability community as a disability justice proposal, further complicating the understanding of the line where disability rights and authentic disability justice may occasionally meet. Ultimately, the bill stalled in negotiations. And while it may be okay to work alongside Democrats, it is not okay to have them lead the direction of policy, which will undercut the people every time. And it would be remiss of me to forget the impact of COVID-19 on the disability community. Disabled people were forgotten from federal and state planning at nearly every stage. We were shouting the need for highly protective masks, extending shutdown periods, and inclusion to receive pandemic stimulus funds, for which those on supplemental security income or Social Security disability were forced to wait months longer than the general population, as Congress considered whether disabled Americans were needy enough for pandemic assistance. With the 2020 election, a Democrat president would continue much along the same course. But herein comes the white disabled spokespeople insisting they would be listened to. After all, they wholeheartedly believed they would be elevated within the administration itself and could be the gatekeepers our community could rely upon. Today, these same individuals are still without those positions of power, and they act flabbergasted that their dearly beloved liberals have yet to heed the calls for safety and protection of the most vulnerable to this virus. They call out the CDC on ableist policies in one breath and celebrate these same administrators in the next. While safety measures are stripped down to force a return to pre-pandemic normality, and COVID testing options and PPE are still disproportionately not available in queer, Black, and brown disabled communities, disabled worthies blast social media applauding the CDC for simply hosting yet again another meeting to talk through the issues. Without skipping a beat, they pick back up, praising Democrats, asking disabled individuals to financially contribute to upcoming campaigns, and they accept DNC speaking engagements. The obvious lesson that disability justice cannot be done from within a capitalist government structure is a hard one to learn for these folks. A class analysis of our circumstances under the pandemic and the power capitalism wields is truly lost on these disabled misleaders. Their inability to recognize that anti-capitalism is key to our liberation has misguided most of their followers as well. And without a clear political compass and strong leadership, those who value disability justice can easily be led into the lion's den, where disabled people are pitted against each other and disability justice simply cannot exist. What's missing from disability justice is a clear political program and centralized leadership. Aside from anti-capitalism, the movement offers no political direction to move forward. It leaves many of us asking, what comes after capitalism for disability justice? And who are the real disability justice leaders? Are they working in concert with one another, or are we creating more silos from which leadership will ultimately wither away? The opportunity here is in growing disability justice within a socialist party, one that values internationalism, feminism, revolutionary integration, and demands no less than what workers and the people deserve. Disability justice believers want to revolutionize the system, and among these folks, the Freedom Socialist Party is uniquely positioned to bridge the gaps between disability justice and Marxist theory because of the party's history, values, and platform. But where do we find these disability justice leaders and supporters? The answer is right in our backyard. About 5 years ago, a group of queer and Black disabled women living in the New York Hudson Valley who require home care services, myself included, and I am proud to also be joined here today by Gemma Kalinda, who is part of that group, said enough is enough. For years, we suffered under austerity policies that relegated home care work to minimum wage positions. New York's worst in the nation home care workforce crisis is forcing tens of thousands of disabled and older New Yorkers to go without needed HCBS and pushing the state's long-term care system into collapse. Recipients of care in all parts of the state cannot staff some or all of their approved hours due to a shortage of workers. And unlike most other industries, low wages here are not currently driven by agency provider greed. Over the last 4 years alone, home care has absorbed more than $500 million in cuts from the state. The privatization of Medicaid managed long-term care plans has insurance companies refusing to negotiate contracts with provider agencies above base rates. Our Hudson Valley group all experienced a quick depletion of qualified workers to do the very essential tasks of personal care, including getting in and out of bed, on and off the toilet, bathing, dressing, cooking, eating, and all other tasks most able-bodied individuals take for granted. The options presented by the state during biannual assessments, which are used to determine if we remain disabled enough for these services, included institutional placement in assisted living facilities or nursing homes, which is nothing short of imprisonment and is a literal death sentence for most of us. We began imagining a new way to fight back against the system. We grew out of a disability justice organization called Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network, and we refused to buy into the capitalist notion spouted for decades from politicians that money for state-funded services was not available. Disabled individuals were told if we wanted higher wages for our workers, the total hours of care provided to recipients would necessarily be capped. Within weeks, we invited seniors and home care workers to the dialogue, and these other folks were experiencing the same oppression, but from a slightly different perspective. And we recognized quickly the power we had when we all spoke in unison, demanding fair pay for home care. We formed the campaign, the New York Caring Majority, and we set out to fight for what we call a caring economy. More than 90% of home care workers are women, and more than 75% are women of color and immigrants. And until recently, home care workers held no federal job protections. The centuries-long sexism and racism within this industry, coupled with ableism and ageism against those receiving services, could very well have been interpreted as weaknesses to our campaign, and many told us it would be impossible to win meaningful advancements. Yet disability justice told us otherwise. Together, we are stronger. Our oppressions do not diminish our capabilities, rather they enhance our know-how and impassion our mission. As we grow over the years, we brought into the ranks of our coalition organizations working on disability rights, licensed home care agencies, home care worker unions, and even a nonprofit managed long-term care plan. The Fair Pay for Home Care campaign is endorsed by more than 110 organizations and is unprecedented in its support by providers, workers' rights groups, consumers, organized labor, and their representatives, most notably SEIU 1199, New York State Nurses Association, NAACP New York, AARP New York, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and Cooperative Home Care Associates, a worker-owned home care agency located in the Southern Bronx and the largest worker cooperative in the United States. We wrote the Fair Pay for Home Care Act with all stakeholders at the table. The legislation calls on the state of New York to raise home care worker wages to 150% of the regional minimum wage, meaning that as other industries win minimum wage increases, home care workers will see an increase in their pay. Our legislation guarantees that home care jobs will never again become minimum wage work. Fair Pay for Home Care will ensure home care workers are paid a fair wage that reflects the vital work they perform. that of ensuring people with disabilities and seniors who need these services are able to live with dignity in their own homes. Additionally, fair pay for home care will also force accountability for privatized managed care plans by establishing a minimum reimbursement rate. The caring majority practices anti-capitalism by refusing to compromise with electeds. Last year, state politicians attempted to cut fair pay to 112% of the minimum wage, and we stood strong in refusing this offer, knowing that it is not what we deserve. Today, fair pay for home care has overwhelming support from the state Senate and Assembly. Both chambers included the full legislation in their respective one-house budgets. However, Governor Hochul is the lone individual standing in the way of fair pay becoming a reality. She instead is focused on corporate handouts of more than $850 million to build a new sports stadium located in our hometown for the Buffalo Bills. This deal also has a personal profit motive, as her husband is senior vice president and general counsel for Delaware North, the major food concessionaire used by the football team. For the last week, hundreds of caring majority leaders have protested at the state capitol and virtually, sharing their stories of how this crisis impacts them and demanding Hochul deliver fair pay for home care for the people. These activists had stood strong, singing songs, chanting, holding teach-ins, and even assisting other movement activists in their fights. On Wednesday evening, 3 caring majority activists were arrested. Thursday, 12 more arrests took place. Our state budget is now past due, and fair pay for home care continues to be considered for inclusion. Caring majority members will meet at the Capitol in Albany this coming Monday at 12 o'clock noon, where they will continue with protest actions and risk arrest should the budget not be finalized. We will not rest until fair pay for home care is enacted throughout the land. And so now I'd like to bring a proposal to the Freedom Socialist Party New York City branch for consideration in solidarity with disability justice activists in 2 parts. First, a formal endorsement of the Fair Pay for Home Care Act. And second, to support the Fair Pay Direct Action Fund, which covers costs for accessible transportation and accommodations needed to get hundreds of older adults and disabled people, their family caregivers, and home care workers into the streets and up at the Capitol. For anyone who may be able to attend Monday's action in Albany, I'll put a registration link in the Zoom chat. Thank you.